chosen the Bowie knife as their pet project for the year. Because I really do have a soft spot for Bowie knives. And once I started going through my photo album and to start choosing pictures, you know, to share various aspects, you know, some of them are going to have narrowing and guards fitted from the front and saddle guards fitted from the bottom and full tangs and mortise tangs and various different things that I want to share with you. I was actually shocked at how, or surprised I think is a better word, at how many I have made over time. And to select out of, I think it was more than 200 Bowies alone photograph to put onto a little slideshow for you and select just the best of what I want to share. So I certainly have made plenty of these things over time. It came as no surprise that the very first knife I ever forged was a Bowie knife. The very first, oh no, not the first, but one of the very first knives I filed when I was still in high school, the punishment I gave myself was a full-size Bowie knife out of D2 steel that time. So, you know, so I have from the very, very early days had a passion for these knives. Now I don't know if it's Klein Mannetjie syndrome or something like that, but I don't know, I get a kick out of big knives. I feel I get a great sense of expression in these big knives. I've certainly made very tiny, delicate ladies' handbag knives and folders and so forth. And yeah, one wouldn't do them if you didn't enjoy it, but the Bowies have been. Now, funny thing is, okay, I'm going to try and stick to my notes, otherwise I tend to sidetrack very, very easily. And there is an awful amount to be said about this, what would at first glance appear a very narrow subject. We in South Africa say Bowie knife. In America they say Bowie knife or Bowie knife. Okay, so if you want to pronounce it properly overseas, it's Bowie or Bowie. Here in South Africa we say Bowie, and they kind of laugh at our pronunciation. That's first thing. I've got some little booklets that Heather and I bought when we were in Arkansas. Now, Arkansas is the home state of the Bowie knife. You've got each and every state in America have adopted a little thing as like their little symbol for the state. In Georgia, it's a peach. They grow peaches there. Okay. In Florida, they've got the space station, the space shuttle.
NASA.
Yeah, Cape Canaveral and all of that. I'm trying to think of a couple of others offhand. But anyway, so you know on our Gauteng GP you've got the little crest. Yeah, so they've got a Bowie knife. Isn't that cool? In Arkansas. Every number plate in Arkansas has got a Bowie knife.
But it's illegal there.
The Bowie knife, yes, incidentally, is the only weapon, and I'm going to say weapon because it wasn't just knife, in history that was declared illegal. It was banned in certain states. And this was sort of the mid-1800s. They declared the Bowie illegal because to kill someone with a Bowie knife, not a sword stick or a flintlock pistol or something like that, but to kill someone with a Bowie knife, that was just too mean. You know, it was unfair. It was unsporting.
How big is that knife then?
Okay, so excellent. Okay, that's not a Bowie knife. Just that you know. All right, so let's go back in history now. The Bowie knife had a famous era that was literally no more than 50 years long. It developed such a fame and infamy in that short space of time that we today are still making Bowie knives. Compare that to other historical or period knives, you know, knives of national significance. Let's talk about the Scandinavians and their pukus, or the Japanese and their tantos, and the Nepalese with kukris. You know, those knives evolved with a nation over hundreds of years. The Bowie knife became famous literally overnight, and I'll tell you the story, until it lost its popularity when handguns, when Samuel Colt came on the scene and developed the 6-gun. Because now suddenly the Bowie knife wasn't so important, because in the heyday of the Bowie knife, people were using little flintlock pistols. They had like voorlaier handguns, and they were very slow and unreliable, and black powder, sometimes the gun didn't go off, and you couldn't rely on these handguns of the time in that time of emergency when the Red Indian is attacking you, or the grizzly bear, or whatever. So you would very often have preferred to whip out your big knife, because the knife would always be ready. You know, never ran out of bullets and didn't have to be reloaded and all that sort of thing. Now, what makes, for us as knife makers, the Bowie knife such a nice thing to make is because those very, very early ones, the one that they say, this is the first Bowie knife, and that is the way a Bowie knife looks. Those knives don't exist. Everyone at the time made them the way they thought they should be made, which gives us the license, the artistic license, to create any big knife with a certain few key elements, because as you're going to see now, I'm going to be showing you Bowie knives that don't look like Bowie knives. But they don't look like Bowie knives that we have typified. You know, we've made Bowie knives in what is almost become a cliche. You know, it's 10 inches long with a concave clip point about 1/3 or halfway along. It's got a double guard square and a straight handle behind. Okay, that Puma, not the Puma that Solingen Bowie knife, that's typical. You know, if you were to just say, draw me a Bowie knife, I think most of us would just draw that. Yet when you go through the history and you see what these early bladesmiths, some of them were surgical instrument makers, some of them were silversmiths, were making, some of them were downright gorgeous. Stunning art pieces, gentleman's jewelry, call them what you want. That for those of you wanting to make a knife for this Bowie knife project, which will be displayed at the Guild show, every knife that is made by SABA members will be in a display cabinet at the annual Guild show. So even if you're not a member, you will have a knife on display there. So yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to get your first foot in the door with some of your work. Now, there's a few bladesmiths who have been given the credit of making the first Bowie knife. Now, what makes it the first Bowie knife? Is it the knife that Jim Bowie carried when he killed 4 guys at, they call it the sandbar fight? He was attacked by 4 people. He was injured himself, but he managed to kill 4 guys armed with flintlock pistols, swords, and sword sticks. These sword blades inside a kiri. So suddenly everybody wants a blade. They go to their local blacksmith and says they want a knife, the one like Jim Bowie used. And eventually it became, I want a Bowie knife. That's how it got its name. So Jim Bowie is the maker of the knife. Was he the original designer of that knife? There's a couple of stories about that. How he went to a blacksmith in the little town of Old Washington. Now they've differentiated Washington, Arkansas from Washington DC by calling Washington, Arkansas Old Washington, because Old Washington today is the site of the ABS Bladesmiths, Bill Moran's School of Bladesmithing, where this pickup comes from, where the school is that Helen and I teach at. It's a little living museum town. If you can think of Pilgrim's Rest, something like that there. All little sinkgebouwtjies, and they've recreated James Black, who was the blacksmith. They've recreated his workshop, and you can go and visit that, and they've got a practicing knife maker there forging knives, and obviously because he's in this museum town, his job, and it's all paid by the state, hey? His job is to forge knives every day, make knives, and he's got to sort of stick to knives of the era. So he tends to make a lot of these primitive mountain man Bowies. He makes a lot of the James Black Bowies. Now James Black was this blacksmith who lived in Old Washington, and Jim Bowie did visit there. And the story goes that he went to James Black with a knife that he had carved out of a tomato box or something. He'd whittled the knife, and he presented that sample to James Black and said, you know, he's on his travels, he's going to come back in 3 months' time and he'll collect the knife that James Black has made. And James Black looked at this design, he said, yeah, it's quite a nice design, but from what Jim Bowie described, his purpose and all of that, James Black made a second knife. He made the first one, but he made a second knife as well, which he then offered to Jim Bowie as a second option. Jim Bowie loved the second option so much he took it as well. So James Black sold 2 knives. Okay, so there is a knife now that they call Bowie number 1. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And that was made by James Black in the town of Old Washington. Jim Bowie himself was a military guy. Maybe not entirely by profession, but he was a land magnate. He wheeled and dealed in property, and some of it he just stole from Indians, and others he purchased, and he grew sugarcane down in Louisiana, and he did all kinds of stuff. So when along came the war against the Mexicans, now the state of Texas was not yet a state of the United States. Texas was an independent piece of ground in the 1836, if I remember the dates correctly, where the famous Mexican leader, Santa Anna, he waged war on the Texicans. And eventually there was 400 Texicans holed up in a little fort in San Antonio. And they were besieged by these Mexicans for, I think it was something like 3 or 4 months. And it was nothing more than, they call it a fort, but it's nothing more than a little church. And that stands today in San Antonio, where the ABS holds their annual show. We have not yet attended that show, but you can go and see this tiny little historical building in downtown San Antonio with modern day architecture all around. But anyway, these few hundred Texicans defended the Alamo. Yeah, so this San Antonio, Texas, and Alamo, it's all the same place. But anyway, they were wiped out down to the last man. One person did survive, and he was a young boy who they had sent out in the middle of the night on horseback to go and call for reinforcements, but unfortunately the reinforcements never came. And yeah, the reinforcements were supposed to have come from a guy called Sam Houston. Okay, have you heard that, you know, coming Houston, you know, from Space Shuttle? You know, Houston, Texas, it's named after Colonel Houston. General Houston. It was Colonel Jim Bowie. Yeah, so Jim Bowie himself was a military guy, and he was in charge of a group of rebels. They were independent freelance soldiers. They were not uniformed men. But anyway, they helped defend the Alamo, and Jim Bowie, together with Davy Crockett, you've heard all these famous names. Davy Crockett was a politician. Everyone thinks of this guy dressed in buckskins and a raccoon skin cap. He must have been quite a hillbilly redneck guy, you know, mountain man person. He was very educated. He was a politician. And yeah, so they all were killed at this Battle of the Alamo, right down to everyone except for this young boy who managed to escape. All right, so I'm going to go through some historical Bowie knife makers by photos just now. But first, let's just talk briefly in the broadest sense, because once you guys have decided you want to make this knife, you must go and research, because the Bowie knife, as far as a historical item, once you start looking on the internet, there's plenty. So you're going to first decide whether your Bowie style is going to be dictated by history. If you choose to make a historical knife, don't just make it your historical knife. Try and recreate either a specific piece or bring out a specific emotion that evokes the style of the time. There are some lovely drawings that I have of historical knives, some that were made in Sheffield. This one here, incidentally, is just about full size of the big old butcher knife that Jim Bowie was supposed to have carried preceding what became the Bowie knife. This was a knife made by a guy called Jesse Clift, pre-1830. This was in Louisiana, also way down south. Alright, so when they say Jim Bowie carried a great big butcher knife, yeah, it could have been just something like that. So if you happen to make just a big old carving knife, this is another Jesse Clift knife, you can see the similarities. Okay, leather scabbards, nickel silver tips to their sheaths. Here is a knife that I have made in the past. This one is a Daniel Searles, 1828. And he was a surgical instrument maker from Baton Rouge, also Louisiana. There was a guy by the name of Henry Shively. And Shively also made a very particular big old carving knife, and he was 1831 odd. Okay, obviously he didn't make knives for 1 year, but that one I've recreated as well from drawings. Now these drawings are from Master Bladesmith Jim Batson. Incidentally, he is a real rocket scientist. He works for NASA. Dr. Jim Batson. There's some more Henry Shively, but I'm not going to bore you with those pictures. If you're interested enough, all the stuff is behind here. Henry Shively, here's another Shively. This one presented to Jesse Perkins by R.P. Bowie. Now who was R.P. Bowie? That was Jim Bowie's brother, and his name was Rezin. R-E-Z-I-N is how you spell it. And Rezin Bowie loved knives as well, but he enjoyed having them custom made and giving them to discerning people of influence in the area, whether it was just buying them with gifts or whatever. But anyway, so this particular Shively Bowie, they will call this the Shively Perkins. And then you will get another, let's say, Samuel Bell Stafford. Now, it's the people that owned the knife, significant people in the early days who owned those, the original one. I've got a bunch of other photostats over here, just some that have been photostated from the Knives Annual, and these were notes made by a Bowie knife fighter down in Natal, a guy who has some particular preferences and heaps of experience. And when they want a fighting Bowie, there's some desirables and undesirables, and if the knife doesn't look right, it just doesn't fit the bill. This guy will carry a 12-inch blade Bowie knife, concealed, under a t-shirt with a pair of denim jeans. And he will walk around town and go to the post office, and that's his chosen self-defense over a firearm. And this guy is trained that I believe the knife will be way more effective than the firearm. These knives here, you will see them, they are quite distinctive. These are what are called Californian Bowies. Now, Californian Bowies are very distinctive. Here's some more, and you'll see they are highly embellished. They are decorated with walrus ivory, mother of pearl, silver, and engraving. There's a couple of modern day bladesmiths who are also copying these old style Californian Bowies. Now, California has a history a little bit parallel to Johannesburg, because San Francisco was founded on the discovery of gold. And you've heard of the term the 49ers. And they were a crowd of people that flocked to San Francisco in 1849, okay, for the gold rush. And within a period of 2 or 3 years, San Francisco turned from a tiny little village with literally a few hundred inhabitants to something that was close to 40 or 50,000. I think it was a 2-year period. And this is a lovely book, Knife Makers of Old San Francisco. You're going to read about knife makers like Will and Fink. He were 2 knife makers that combined to make a workshop. Van and Harvey, eh? Smith and Harvey.
That would be cool.
Okay, Will and Fink, very famous knives. You can expect to pay up to $30,000 if you find an old antique. So keep an eye out in these pawn shops. You never know what you might find. If you find another one that says M. Price, San Fran. Okay, that's a sword for San Francisco. M. Price, Michael Price. Same thing. Many thousands of dollars worth. And somebody might just think that it's just another old knife. But these things are highly prized and valuable. But the reason for those knives being so opulent was you landed up with a crowd of people on one of the richest gold mining, gold-bearing earth in the history of the world, where there were nuggets, solid nuggets, that they would dig out of the rock with a knife, weighing 3 ounces, so 3 Kruger coins worth, in one scoop of a knife out of the stone. The guys became stinking rich with one find. And what did he spend it on? He's in a frontier town that's a new city bursting at its seams. I mean, there's only so much you can spend it on, like drink and prostitutes and I don't know what, you know. You know, so what these guys landed up spending their money on was with these few early day custom knife makers whose knives reflected the economy that they lived in. People would spend fortunes on a knife. So they put the engraving and the silver and the walrus ivory and the mother of pearl and all of that on. They were beautiful, beautiful knives. There's no holding back. So don't just make an old frontier backwoods Bowie knife with a wooden handle. Look at the California knives. They are very, very pretty. Okay, so first of all, you've decided on your style. What do you want it to do? A historical, it's a fantasy. Maybe the purpose doesn't even exist. Its function is imagined. That's also a valid reason. Okay. Is it a fighter blade? Is it a bush wilderness survival thing? Is it a wood chopper? If you're going to make a wood chopper, it's going to be made differently to a fighter. The fighter is going to be light and quick. It's got a dagger point. The wilderness knife is balanced entirely differently. It's heavier to the front. It's more blade heavy. The fighter needs to be tip light, not tip heavy. So you've decided on the function first. You've got styles that are dictated by their origins. Okay, we talk about the southwestern Bowies. Now, southwestern Bowies, there's not a straight line on those knives. Have you heard of what's called a swayback? The swayback Bowie or anything. The spine of the knife is hollowed out. It's not straight. So if I look down the spine of this knife, it's concave. This one. Okay? The clip is concave. From here, it curves. Now, a typical Sheffield Bowie, remember, so we're talking about a style by origin. Sheffield Bowies are all very crisp and clean, square lines. This is a southwestern Bowie. So even this cutting edge, this part here, which on a Sheffield Bowie would be perfectly straight. Sheffield Bowie would have a straight clip. This has got a curve. But even here, it's not a straight line. It's a very long, graceful curve. When you start putting a handle on this thing, it has what's called a halfpenny guard. Or it's typically made by your frontier blacksmith. This wasn't made by a specialist knife maker. He was just a blacksmith. The guy came in there with an old file and said, "Can you make me a big knife like Bowies?" Okay, so the blacksmith would forge a guard, so it had that S curve to it. There's a thing called a halfpenny guard, where it's got this little scroll that's like either fire welded back onto itself, so it makes like a little solid disc. That's where it gets its name. and here it's got a little button. We can draw it on the paper if you like. You all know what I mean by the description I've given of the half penny guard. The handles were often stag antler. So you've got these curves, the curvature of the stag. So there were no straight lines on a southwestern Bowie. The Sheffield Bowie, on the other hand, like I say, very crisp and clean. We've discussed the Californian Bowies. You've got styles by shape, where you've given your knife a distinction because yours has a D guard. It's got the full knuckle guard going around here, and that was inspired by the swords of the time. A lot of Bowie knives were fashioned from broken sabres. They would have just forged that blade out wider, sharpened the clip a little bit, and left the D-guard. So it's essentially a sword grip with a Bowie blade. You had your Civil War era Bowie knives. Also, they were almost a bit like gladiuses. You know, the Roman gladius? Some of them looked like that. It's a Bowie knife, but they're not sharpened all the way down both sides. You've got a primary edge, and you've got the sharpened clip. So, yeah, you've got C guards. C guards are like that, aiming forward. When I go through the slideshow, I'll show you some C guards. You've got knives that, like the Daniel Searles, have no ricasso. So those of you who find ricassos a challenge, choose a Bowie that has no ricasso. You don't have to worry about those plungers being symmetrical. Okay? Maybe Daniel Searles wasn't as good as we thought he was. Okay, but let's see what we get. Yeah. Clean. Yeah. Why is it doing that?
You don't know what it's doing. We clean.
Okay, let's see what happens. There are handles called dog bones. There are handles called coffins. So those are styles by shape. Okay, but once we find the photos. Somebody who knows what's going on, just call that program up for me. I hate to admit this. Yeah, so shortcut to historical Bowie.
Yeah, but we used the shortcut.
It's a shortcut to somewhere.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I know what I'm doing wrong. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your help, I appreciate it. Yeah, so these little books, by the way, this talks about Arkansas and the toothpick state. The Bowie was often referred to as an Arkansas toothpick. It kind of referred to the hillbilly, you know, what do you call these people? They're not cliches.
Cliches.
Stereotype is the word I'm looking for. You know, an Arkansas oak was like this Vrystater.
Oh, that's going to come back and bite you.
Somewhere.
Okay. You know, just the
typisch Belfast onderkoopling.
Ja, jy bly. You know, so there's like hillbilly, you know, pick your teeth with your Bowie knife, you know. So that's, you know, it kind of described the people as well as the knife. But in the beginning, this Arkansas toothpick and the Bowie, the two terms were used sort of interchangeably. There was no real differentiation between the two. But eventually, in later time, we have begun to refer to the Arkansas toothpick as a dagger, double-edged, with an almost straight, tapering, triangular profile. It's not like a Fairbairn Sykes dagger or anything like that. It's just a triangle to a point. It's a spike. And there's a martial art fighting form where you use two knives, Arkansas toothpick in the one hand and a Bowie knife in the other. The Bowie knife had a primary cutting edge for the slashes and chops. The Arkansas toothpick had the point as its primary feature. So there was a move that they referred to as the bull's horns. So let's say the guy's on his knees or something, he's fallen down, you charge him like that, both points. Okay, Arkansas toothpick.
And shout, ole!
Alright, so we're going to discuss George Woodhead Bowie as a Ricasso-less Bowie, and Daniel Searles. Okay?
No?
Why is that not going there?
I think you have to drag it to the
Yeah,
right.
drag it.
Click on it and drag it. Keep it in.
Drag it to the right. You need 2 hands to do it, Kevin.
Oh, yeah, I need half a brain to do it.
Yields!
That's enough.
Okay, don't worry, we've got another pilot, it's okay.
Okay, so you've got frontier Bowies.
There you go.
Okay, so what we call... Now, why don't I see it there?
Because it doesn't work that way.
I don't know this program. How do you go? This is like yes.
Yeah, so when you go, play it. There's that top play.
Okay, that's... Oh, so I'm driving the laptop, the mouse here.
Yeah, we're good. Ooh, birdie.
All right, now this particular one. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause on that picture now for a while.
Do you want to zoom in a bit?
I'm keen to see somebody in the Bowie Knife build. Those of you who are folder makers should not feel excluded, because I feel that is super interesting.
And there you put it.
Okay,
He's taking notes, Leap.
this is a modern day recreation of that. So look how antique that looks. These guys, I mean, in the States we've seen guys by the name of, it'll come to me, but they will bury these knives in coarse salt, for example, and dampen the coarse salt, and let it get pit holes. There's a technique that they call the mustard finish. Have any of you heard of that?
Yeah.
It's a technical term referred to, you know, hot dog sauce, mellow and mild or something. It's got vinegar and salt and all other stuff. You just put dobs of mellow and mild mustard over your nicely polished blade, allow it to rust up a little bit. You rub it off with some fine steel wool, and you do it again, and you give it a natural patina. It looks like an old thing. And very often knives like this, that look old, may not be. There's a short little article written by Mark Zaleski. Have anybody heard his name mentioned before? He's the editor of a knife maker's newspaper called Knife World. You can subscribe to that just like Blade magazine. Knife World, Mark Zaleski, very knowledgeable guy, particularly with antique knives. But he said, if you're going to make historical replicas, you have a very big responsibility to historical Bowie collectors to mark your knives properly with your name on it, and that the repercussions of someone making a modern day forgery could be very severe for everybody. That if ever you were to try and put an M. Price San Fran on a knife that you make and palm it off as the real deal, that can be big time. Well, that's fraud, isn't it? So, but anyway, that's a folding knife. Let's just go from here. Okay, Bowie ideas. This is a very nice book if you are keen on Bowie knives. Bill Bagwell was one of the founder members of the American Bladesmith Society. And he's a martial artist specializing in Bowie knife fighting. He has given classes to the Navy SEALs and all other kinds of Darkmach and special forces and so forth. And he is very, very pro Bowie knife. One may almost think biased towards Bowie. And once you start reading the book, you also become biased. Because what he does is he will take each and every famous fighting blade that we are familiar with, Kukris and Fairbairn Sykes' and Tontos and so forth, and analyze each and every of these knives and discuss the qualities required in a true fighting blade. And these properties are reach. So it's got to be long enough. It's mass. It's got to be heavy enough that when you are committed to delivering a chopping blow, the momentum of that knife carries it through. So something like a Fairbairn Sykes has no mass. So it kind of lacks as a chopping knife. It's got a very good point for sticking, but then if designed properly, if you have a look at those blades, they also have a point. So what's the big deal about a Fairbairn Sykes? The Bowie knife may not be so heavy that it becomes, that the momentum or the mass of the knife makes it a slow blade. It's got to be heavy enough in the hand, yet light enough at the tip to be fast. It's got to have a primary edge that is scary sharp. It's got to cut like the sharpest sushi knife, carving knife. It's got to be scary sharp. It's a fighting blade is attacking the human flesh covered in clothing. It's not a bread knife. It's not chopping a 2x4. It doesn't need that robust heaviness in your edge geometry to do what it's designed to do. It's not like the kukri, for example, that has such a heavy edge, it is